shingles.
No. Oh.
Yeah. We think that because it, impacts your immune system, we think that it just shocked my immune system and woke up because I'm of the generation of chicken pox, like where you got chicken pox.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it just sits dormant in your body. So I have a beautiful like shoulder thing.
Oh, shoot.
It looks angry, but it looks worse than it feels. And I'm on antivirals, and I bought some essential oils today at Lucky's.
There you go.
If that helps with like in the diffuser, but.
So I've had the first Shingrix, whatever the shot is. It's a 2-dose thing. So I'm in the middle of getting. Actually, I can probably get the second one now.
Maybe
I should get that before I get the vaccine, right?
Yeah, I mean, you might.
Finish it up.
Well, I had the first shingles when we only needed one, but then they changed it and you needed two. And I
the booster,
one. The first and second one this winter, but I have had problems. I had my first year of teaching, I ended up with a paralyzed face on one side from some sort of herpetic virus, which is the shingles virus. And for years, I would say 30 years, I could feel this whole side of my face.
That's what I've heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was quite, it was an awful experience. I missed probably at least 6 weeks of teaching my first year because of that. It was awful. And
yeah, I feel lucky because I've been obviously going to Dr. Google as much as possible and seeing the pictures of it, like taking over people's faces. And I mean, mine's just like here and here.
Right. Yeah.
But it started with neck pain. Like I thought I hurt my neck. And then I felt really crummy the next day. And then the next day I was like, what is on me?
Oh my
and I work for a physician, and thankfully I was able to consult with him because it was like a Sunday, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that looks pretty shingly." I'm like,
Wow.
I kind of feel like we're expecting Dr. Rick to show up.
Yeah.
I listened to Stephanie Miller, who is one of the progressive talkers, but she has a guy on who is also on MSNBC and stuff, but she calls him Dr. Doom.
Yeah.
And so you just never know what he's gonna. But he's his son is at Ohio State actually. As a beta and at Ohio State and had COVID there. So he's been through all of it with him, and he's an infectious expert or an infection expert kind of thing. So, but yeah, there are just so many things going on.
Yeah. Well, why don't we, I think this is the group we're going to have tonight. Why don't we jump in? Zach, do you want me to share, or do you want to share your screen?
Let me share my screen so that way you guys don't have to look at my ugly mug here.
So we wound up reopening the survey because it didn't show up in this week until like weeks after the guy talked to me, which is sort of strange. But anyway, I think those things happen.
Yeah.
I don't know, Zach, how many more responses we got, but he's had a limited amount of time to do some segmentation analysis that I think is really interesting. So we'll kick off with that.
We got 6 more. So
okay, 6 more.
Let's see here. Share screen.
So there'll be more that we'll do here, but I think this is starting to show what's possible with the data. So the geographic stuff we haven't had a chance to dig into yet. So
host disable participant screen sharing. We're doing better already though than a work meeting I was on today. It was about data science, and we had to talk 10 minutes about how to share audio for a video that someone was trying to play, which I got a kick out of. All right, there we go. Slideshow from beginning. There we go.
Got it.
All right. So hello, everyone. Excited to be sharing this. Put this together real quickly today, so forgive me if there are typos, and have a little grace on me in regards to that. But real excited to kind of share what we're beginning to see in the survey. So I've tentatively titled this, and this title is up for discussion, Reconnecting Clintonville. So I think one of the things that really shined in this survey, as it were, was the fact that we're living in COVID times, right? And I think that thread kind of runs throughout the survey, but it still doesn't minimize, I think, the things that people are calling to attention. And really what we were seeing is kind of big picture is that really a lot of our neighbors are really seeking to make kind of connections in the neighborhood, be that personal connections, be that connections between sidewalks, which was the big winner, but then also having spaces to make connections. So places like restaurants, bars, etc., when things get back to normal. So I would say overall, there was really tremendous enthusiasm. I read every single one of those qualitative responses at least 3 times. And the thing that was really striking to me was the amount of thought people were really putting into the responses. Everything from, even 10 to 15 word responses that would sometimes be tagged with 6 or 7 things to 350 word responses where I could just tag one thing, unfortunately. But people were really opening up and telling us what they would like to see improved in the neighborhood, and really taking the exercise very seriously, which I thought was great. So bullet number 2 there, overall, sidewalks and crosswalks were the most major concern. Throughout the survey, residents both commented prior to actually seeing the list of things, and then selected that repairing and connecting those sidewalks were a major priority to them. Overall, 29%, or 230 people, actually mentioned sidewalks in their qualitative comments. Again, that was unprompted before they even saw the exercise, which I think is incredibly notable. Overall, in that choice tournament exercise that everyone did, sidewalks wound up rating first and second, with the repair being number 1 and the add and connect being item number 2. So second to the sidewalks issue, if you kind of lump those 2 together, the third most important thing was the aesthetic appearance of the neighborhood. But the opinions about what that means and what that should be varied quite a bit. This was intentional, right? This was worded intentionally because we wanted people to say, yes, I care about the appearance of the neighborhood, but we used those qualitative responses to really understand what they were trying to mean. So kind of not to generalize too much, because again, it's easy to do that with this type of stuff, but generally speaking, younger residents, and by that I mean under the age of 60, generally speaking, had a more slight preference to see kind of increased density, more people living in the neighborhood, while older residents, and by older I mean 40 and above, right? There's some overlap there. Tended to prefer, kind of the single family housing stock feel of the neighborhood. They were a little more hesitant to embrace kind of the multifamily structures that we kind of seeing popping up more frequently in the neighborhood. Many of them felt like those apartment complexes, specifically the one in Indianola was mentioned, could be not such great apartment complexes in the future, right, if they aren't kept up. But overall, one common thread that we saw throughout the survey was people, regardless of kind of where they fell in the segments later, everybody kind of wanted a more walkable neighborhood, right? And that walkable neighborhood kind of varied based on who you were talking to. Walkable to some people was, I want to feel safe being able walking in the neighborhood, or, traffic is a lot and I don't feel safe with my kids out on the street. But I would say probably the majority of people, probably 30 to 40% of the people that were talking about walkability, it really had a lot to do with businesses, and specifically kind of developing businesses. There was a couple of explicit call-outs in the survey about the Clintonville Chamber of Commerce, I will note. So specifically, when it came to the businesses that people were looking for, I don't think anybody would be surprised that there's a lot of people that don't want kind of those corporate businesses here in the neighborhood, right? They don't want the Starbucks, they don't like the banks, as it were. But there are others that didn't really like some of the maybe more marginal businesses that we see in some of the perhaps the older strip malls, closer to the northern part of the community, be those kind of the thrift stores, right, as it were, or businesses that kind of cater to secondhand items. So there was, again, kind of a pretty broad diversity when you actually got into it of what people were kind of looking for. There were some people that didn't like chiropractors. There were some people that didn't like the auto parts stores, right? A lot of the things that we hear in the neighborhood and our neighbors talking about on a day-to-day basis were really popping up in here. But one of the things, again, that was that consistency around, we would love to see more restaurants and kind of local businesses that way. So the kind of the third big bucket, as it were, of stuff that was really screaming out was the street lining, the traffic calming, and roadway improvements. So again, generally speaking, people want those things, but what they're looking for also kind of varied in these buckets too. And the next 5 slides will kind of get into those. So some people were really satisfied with just the idea of putting additional stop signs or increasing police presence to monitor speeding. Other people were happy with intersections, but some people were also against police. Some people were also against stop signs, and they wanted things like speed humps, right? Or one person, even suggested roundabouts, right? Which I don't think is a realistic possibility in some parts of this neighborhood, but certainly, that those were some concerns. Other residents, when talking about street lighting, it was largely along major corridors, which I thought was interesting. And when they were talking about street lighting, it was largely talking about kind of more tightly spaced lighting for those people that were walking. And then there were other people that were talking more specifically about decorative lighting. And there's actually kind of a group of people that are really into that decorative lighting piece, hanging, potential banners from those lights, etc. But the one thing that people wanted in this kind of category was consistency. I didn't put that here. I should probably write that down, but people really, really wanted consistency across the neighborhood in terms of what these improvements look like. They see kind of what's going on in Worthington. They see what's going on down at the Short North area. They really see that consistency, and they're hoping that consistency kind of makes its way into Clintonville as kind of a larger piece. And of course, with any survey, we are remiss if we don't at least mention the rain gardens. There are a lot of people that commented about the rain gardens, and specifically a lot of them talking about how they were, how they believe that they were poor traffic calming mechanisms. There's at least 3 or 4 people that mentioned that directly. There was also a significant number of people, perhaps with families themselves, that were talking about kind of the safety of children near schools, specifically Dominion and Middles and or Old Dominion Middle, I should say, was a site that came up frequently. So that's kind of the high level 10,000-foot view of kind of what everybody was saying. Now with this, right, I think the interesting thing about research and stuff like this is when you look at the average type overall picture, you get a lot of ideas, right? You're like, okay, yeah, this is great. But in the next 5 screens, I'm going to show you some breakdowns of what different groups of people are saying. And so that way, maybe we can help contextualize it as we begin moving forward. Now, before I start showing these, one of the things I'll note is this is a very simplistic way of sorting people or a very complex way of simplistically sorting people into buckets. There are a lot of people throughout these that, 2 or 3 of these labels could represent them. By no means did you get a label and that's one label that you can live with, right? The math, that's what it did, right? That's what the math does. But from a human standpoint, any one of these labels could apply to 2 or 3 of them could apply to any one person. So this will just give you kind of an idea, again, of the concerns of people that have these types of attitudes towards the built environment.
So real quick, Zach, before you go on, I did think it was interesting. There's a lot of research out there around walkability, and we always talk about, the distance people are willing to walk And generally, you find the same thing with driving or riding a bike, that there's sort of a time decay curve at 20 minutes. So you're willing to walk for 20 minutes, you might be willing to ride a bike for 20 minutes to get to a destination. But the key part that you were getting at there is, what's the destination? Mm-hmm. People need something to ride to. And so some of that walkability, our built environment, whether it's, too many surface parking lots you have to walk by to get to your destination, whether you feel safe walking on a sidewalk right next to traffic, whatever it is going to impact whether you're going to use, your feet or a bike, or you're going to get in a car to get to that place. So I think that's an important, some of the stuff that we're seeing in the survey, it's important to sort of highlight those connections between the overall built environment. And while on the surface, Clintonville is very walkable, there are probably some point-to-point destinations that don't feel like they are, and so people don't do it.
And it's also not very walkable when the snowplows push the snow back over the sidewalks. So
it all melted, Libby. It all melted.
Well, on Indianola. Sorry.
It's going to take a minute. It's going to take a minute for that to disappear.
Yeah. Just my little, input.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Could I say something? And I commend you. It was a very well-crafted survey, and I'm so glad that we got as many responses as we did. But I think that walkability, with all of the common concerns that you received from the participants of the survey, I think that could be delved out into a whole other show, Oprah. I think we probably need to consider maybe doing just a survey on just walkability. I think that's probably the one thing that we could highlight from this survey. Not that you did anything wrong, but I think that gives a lot of credence to something that we need to delve into a little bit more. So one of the things that I've discovered with my parking task force, and we only met 3 times prior to COVID, but one of the things that I keep seeing that is a chronic factor is that we really don't have. To achieve walkability, we have to be able to have what Andrew said. We have to have those destinations, but we need to have them integrated within each faction of our neighborhood, within, all along the High Street corridor. And we need to give a little bit more diversity of commerce within those neighborhoods. And it wouldn't surprise me if you went in and found that a lot of the people who were complaining or were a little bit concerned about the abundance of automotive industry that came from the Sharon Heights District 9 people, because we're heavily populated, overly populated with automotive industry here. So I think until we get to the point where we're saying no more automotive industry here, and no more coffee shops here, and no more banks here. I think until we get to the point where we can have a little bit better influence on these developers, I don't think that we're going to have the walkability until we achieve abundance within a neighborhood. And by that, I mean within Beachwald, within Sharon Heights, within Central Clintonville. Until we make our immediate neighborhoods more abundantly populated with a little bit of restaurant, a little bit of coffee shop, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, until we can have that kind of influence to shape and mold that High Street corridor, we're not going to achieve that 20-minute walk. So I think if you were able to structure a survey around walkability that helps make that argument, I think that would be fascinating. But of course, that's nothing. That could be something in the pipeline. That could be something on the back burner.
Well, I do think BJ, there's a way to address that we haven't done yet. And Zach, I can see it on your face. You're probably about to say the same thing I am. So you mentioned specific parts of the neighborhood, and did those comments come from certain places? We're able to do that in the next level of analysis. So we'd be able to say, where were those pockets of the neighborhood that complained the most about crosswalks or sidewalks or walkability? Where were those people concentrated? So in the next level of analysis, I think we'll be able to get to pinpointing those locations. And that, I think, should help pinpoint those problems that you're highlighting, Vijay.
Great.
And that geographic analysis is, I think, going to be with this project. I've already seen things. Every project like this is always surprised by what I see. And I'm really interested in looking at those maps because
Zach, your voice is real. I don't know what you would call it. Like you're possessed, perhaps.
Oh, you sound like Froggy from The Little Rascals.
Is this better?
Oh yeah,
that's better. Might have just been like where you were positioned in.
There we go.
Yeah,
nice.
you sounded like my great grandmother Ballard.
But yeah, I was just saying, I think it's really interesting to look at this from a geographic perspective, and that's the next phase, and it's going to be really fascinating to see what comes out of that. So, okay, any other questions here on this page before we move on? We'll take the silence as a no. Okay. So the first group, I have titled Neighbors Keepers. So I like to title these groups because it kind of helps provide a big picture conception of kind of who they are. And I'm to let you guys know, if you guys are like, Zach, that's an awful name for this group, please tell me. I'm not going to be offended. But yeah, so this one I'm tentatively calling this. I came up with these at like 3 or 4 o'clock this afternoon, so forgive me as well. But so this is about a quarter of the respondents to the survey. This is perhaps the youngest group of residents. They've been living in the neighborhood for under 15 years typically. That doesn't mean that this just under 15 years. There's people all 10 years in the neighborhood here. And this group has one of the higher proportions of renters in it, but is still vast majority owner, with 90% saying they own. The 3% of other in this group had some people that were saying, oh, it's complicated. Oh, I live in a duplex. They weren't really quite sure what to say. So generationally, this is also the youngest group, as you would expect in being kind of the lowest in tenure. Big proportion of millennial and big proportion of Gen X residents that answered this survey fit into this group. Just note that, there weren't a lot of Gen Z respondents overall, which isn't necessarily surprising because, that's getting close to college age still, and a lot of them are probably still Old North Columbus and down towards campus and University District. So their top infrastructure priorities based on the choice exercise were those adding and connecting those sidewalks, the bike lanes, repairing leveling sidewalks, and improving multi-use paths. When you looked at their qualitative responses in the box below, their priorities were kind of development, historic preservation, services such as public transit, development such as housing affordability, bicycle infrastructure, and then notably social justice and racial equity issues. So this group had a higher proportion of people responding to those issues than other groups did. So my summary that I kind of wrote up to describe them as, as the newest, youngest, and most highly educated, because that's another piece that is notable. These residents are really focused on kind of how infrastructure and built environment can improve access for all residents. They see a very clear intersection between transit, affordable housing, and infrastructure issues, right? So generally speaking, they're supportive of new development, but they don't want to see new development kind of lead to a decrease of housing affordability. Likewise, they also see opportunities, lots of opportunities for community conversations and outreach. Several of the comments in this area were like, why is this survey about infrastructure? This doesn't need to be about infrastructure. This needs to be about racial justice and equity. There was one comment like, this is what you do? Come on, we've got racists in the neighborhood, right? So there was a strong contingent of people in this group that really felt that, that some people were actually making a clear link between housing affordability and equity. Some others were talking about how, this is a traditionally, white neighborhood and they wish it wasn't that way. And, the built environment has some things to do with that. So with each of these, I tried to pull 2 quotes from each group that was kind of representative of the comments that were being said. For this one, it was supported neighborhood schools, increased diversity, affordable housing, sidewalk repair, and rainwater management were the priorities that this person identified. And then the other person is ideally more diversity of socioeconomic classes, races, nationalities, ethnicities. And then again, that comment about this is a notoriously white part of town due to pricing, and that's how it's been, but it doesn't have to be that way in the future. So yeah, so this group, it was surprisingly the largest group of respondents. Now, the other groups that you're going to see, again, there's some blend, but I thought that this was really interesting that this kind of popped to the top. And maybe not so much given some recent history here in Columbus, but especially notable. Are there any questions kind of on this group before we move on?
Zach, was there a delineation between affordable housing, low-income housing, and affordable housing, workforce housing?
There was not.
Okay. So
that's a great question. I mean, I share your interest in that too, Jim. And
yeah,
I think that it was more of an affordability piece, less so than specifically what type of investment needs to be made. Right. I mean, I'm steeped in the language of LIHTC. I know that world inside and out, and there was nobody speaking directly to that, but, or even workforce housing. But I think when looking at these responses, and I can certainly do some more digging against that, but there wasn't any clear delineation on the surface.
I just, one of my hobbies is to just check out home sales and things, and it appears to me, and I don't have any graphs or anything to go with this, but that housing has taken a huge jump here in Clintonville, where the prices of homes has really jumped a lot, whereas it was fairly level for a couple of years. And I can see how some of this is getting into that. And I've got a daughter and son-in-law who, I guess they're millennials, who have bought a house here in Clintonville, and just having to bring that house, even though it appeared to be in good shape, there were lots of things to bring it up to a really good structure, and that's taken a lot. So I can see where some of these comments would come from them also.
Yeah, I know that there's been a lot of pressure, specifically north of Cook Road, generally speaking, on housing prices. That's where you're really seeing kind of the most growth right now.
Well, and that would come from a lot of the retirees and things who are looking for one level homes.
Okay. So on the next one, we have the group that I'm tentatively calling traditionalist, right? So, so speaking of those retirees, so this was the second largest group, about a little over 22%. So most of them have lived in Clintonville a pretty wide variety of years, 15 to 50, right? But they've been here a while. 88% owned. This is the largest renter group, 9% rent and 2% other. This other in this group, there were a couple of landlords that responded that don't actually live in the neighborhood, but own properties in the neighborhood. So their top infrastructure priorities were repairing leveling sidewalks, connecting those sidewalks, improving street lighting, and improving alleys and service roads. So very kind of, dare I say, nuts and bolts. I'm a homeowner here, and these are the things that I'm looking for. In the qualitative comments, it was street lighting. And the notable thing is that when I was marking comments like, are they for increased development? Are they not? This group was notably kind of against increased density and development and had a, generally speaking, pretty strong single family preference. So again, maintaining that character of the neighborhood. Infrastructure, this was also a group that was very, dare I say, anti-rain garden for obvious reasons. And they really wanted to see some alley improvements because they felt as if the alleys were in pretty rough shape. This was also the group that had a surprising kind of ping as well. There was some significant age in place and American with Disabilities Act concerns that they had, specifically regarding kind of walkability in the neighborhood and the ability to be able to age in place successfully in the neighborhood. I know that there's a couple age in place initiatives here in the Clintonville area, including the village, as it were. But again, maybe that's one of those opportunities where, as the Planning and Development Committee and as the larger commission, we can use our bully pulpit, as it were, to talk about those things. Services, the police, crime, and safety. This is the one that popped in this category. Theft, crime, speeding, those types of things were high on the list. And then lastly, infrastructure and parks and recreation. So looking for activities in parks specifically. Some of the folks in other categories are more concerned with things like the YMCA and other kind of pools, things like that. But this group was much more in kind of they just want a nice place to be able to go in terms of a park. So the summary that I've written here is, as some of the most senior Clintonville residents, many desire to keep the neighborhood's current character. These neighbors really want to see sidewalks that are, leveled, repaired, and improve that street lighting. They also want to see those alleyway improvements and are really concerned with the ability to age in place. So same things I just said, but just kind of written in a summary. Quotables. So this one I thought was particularly prescient. Please do not make Clintonville an urban canyon like the Short North. Keep the diversity and unique flavor of our part of town, right? So one, the language there I think is really interesting. That person saying this is our part of town, right? And the urban canyon effect, which I think is really interesting, kind of describing that increase the against the increased development aspect. And then below that, less multifamily housing and be careful how High Street is developed. These are major corner developments and they're not ideal for the neighborhood cut through and volume for small businesses that anchor our community. So again, kind of a traditional view of what Clintonville is. And they don't want to see necessarily a lot of change. Are there any questions here? Okay.
A long way to go before we get to canyons, but that's a pretty it's pretty good sort of capturing of that sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, it's you drive down High Street in the Short North, and it does sometimes feel like a canyon these days. It's pretty incredible the change that's gone on down there. So the third group.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say it's very difficult to balance these concerns and to kind of lead and work with developers the way that the commission is supposed to do when you're trying to say we have affordable housing, we have diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds, we're not the out of control spiking housing values affluent neighborhood. We have that here. We have multifamily housing, we have affordable housing. I just don't understand how we're supposed to, achieve the goal of having affordable housing without catering to multifamily development.
Yeah.
No, you're exactly right.
Yeah, there's a tension there.
There's some tension there. Now, there was some folks that were suggesting granny flats, and actually this next group, we'll get into that a little bit more. But yeah, there may be some suggestions from our residents about how to solve that problem.
And I'm not sure how actually diverse we are. Just, you know, that's just a observation of mine.
Yeah.
I like to think we are, but I'm not sure we are.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why we asked some of the education and income questions, right, to understand kind of what that diversity looks like. And I would say Clintonville is very affluent and very highly educated.
Mm-hmm.
I think that quote, though, that might not necessarily mean diversity as in race, especially because they're talking about, you know, like unique flavor of our part of town. They could be referring to just the diversity of businesses.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. Okay. So the next group is the opposite of the previous group. And these are kind of the people that are the urbanists, is what I'm calling them. So 19%, a little less than the traditionalist, but relatively equal in proportion. They lived in the neighborhood less time and very heavily owner, only 2% rent. These are people that are vested in the neighborhood, which I think is an important point to make. Again, generally a little younger, but a lot of them are in the Gen X bucket, and there's some boomers here too. So their infrastructure priorities were improving the aesthetic appearance of streetscapes along major commercial corridors, those parks, improve existing multi-use paths, additional street trees, which I know is a hot topic, and then improving bike lanes or other bike infrastructure. And their qualitative, really for that increased density was the thing that popped at the top. And then that tree canopy, multi-use paths, historic preservation, parks and recreation, and then electrical improvements, which I'll talk about with another group a little bit more. So overall, they're very supportive of increasing density. Their infrastructure priorities are really to improve the appearances of streetscapes, corridors, improve parks, adding and improving multi-use paths, new street trees, bicycle infrastructure, right? These are the people that are kind of, you know, as someone with a planning background is kind of the genuine urbanist, right? You know, they really want the neighborhood to be more walkable, right? They see more bars, shops, and restaurants, and they're really open to a wide variety of development as opposed to maybe more just narrow restaurants and bars, right? They're really open to a much broader category of development. So the comments that really embody this is I would like to have more of a downtown area, you know, a food truck pavilion like Portland or Austin, something that would attract people from the suburbs, bring people from outside into the community, right? Which I'm sure other groups would probably not be as fond of. And then encourage more restaurants, coffee shops, local stores, especially in the northern areas such as Beachwald, add sidewalks to provide safe routes throughout the neighborhood, right? So some pretty good examples there. And this group, in terms of the qualitative examples, there were so many, it was hard to, I tried to pick some short ones, but there's a fairly passionate contingency of people in this bucket. And I would say there's a lot of energy, more energy in this bucket than there are in the others. So any questions with this group?
I think it's really interesting, especially to sort of see what the different priorities are and where they slide up and down the scale. It's really helpful.
You know what I would like, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I think what would be a really interesting, I don't know if you're going to understand what I'm trying to say here, but it would be neat to see on a trend timeline. Zach, you're probably laughing at me because I don't speak your language very well, but on a trends timeline, a graph that shows, and here's what I thought diversity meant. I thought it meant not a racial component, but a socioeconomic. That's usually how we measure demographics in real estate. So it would be interesting to toggle to a trend, like where was Clintonville in 1990? Where was it in 1995? Where was it in 2000, 2005, 2010, 15, 20, and take that up and just kind of see where the socioeconomic component of Clintonville is taking us. Where was it 20 years ago? Where was it 30 years ago? And then where do we see it going up to 2050? Because to me, these summaries, these quotables, when you talk about you felt that this had the most energy, I think that the data here is very rich. And if we can say that this particular group of urbanists, we see Clintonville growing, has increased this particular category of people. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, certainly what we could do is there's some normalized census data out there that exists. The hardest thing with that information is actually controlling for things like cost of living. But, certainly maybe we could look at some of that data and peel back the layers of that onion, right? What I would say too is in regards to that, holding Columbus similar to other metros. I mean, this is, kind of in a weird way, this area, the Near East area, Roman Village, Schumacher Place area, are kind of the more urban places perceived in the city. With the exception of maybe kind of the inner ring suburbs, and BJ, if you want to have a deeper conversation about this, I could talk all day about the suburbs. With some of those with Clintonville being an inner ring suburb, what you're seeing is a lot of community chains in those neighborhoods throughout the country. It's not just exclusive to Columbus. So there's a lot of energy, especially, I mean, you think about a place like Minneapolis these days or Nashville, and they're seeing a lot of the same phenomena that we're seeing here. So and by no means were we isolated, but I could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, I think it's great data. I can't wait to use it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we could do, Zach, would just be to do a quick comparison of demographics, just to see. I mean, and we could get into average age of household and number of kids and all that stuff that might be pretty interesting to sort of compare against what people's perceptions or impressions or feelings are, as opposed to real facts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Zach, did you see what the electrical improvements means?
So I'll get to that. I'll talk about that with another group, because that's an interesting subgroup of people that made comments.
Wi-Fi.
I bet you Libby knows exactly where this is going. Got a good feeling. All right. So the next group is this peace and quiet group, is what I'm calling them tentatively. I was trying to come up with a really nice way of saying they just had a lot of complaints.
I love this. I love these names.
I love it.
So this is the best I could come up with. So these are about 18% of folks. They've lived in the neighborhood kind of the widest variety of years. They're very consistent in terms of the rent to own matrix. They're very consistent in terms of kind of the generational breaks with the rest of the neighborhood, right? But their top priorities are really slowing down and calming down traffic, making things look prettier, and I'll be specific about that in a moment, and then repairing or leveling sidewalks. Not connecting, note, repairing and leveling, which is interesting. So their top qualitative priorities were traffic calming, animal control, Starbucks, and services such as sweet sweeping, leaf, and snow removal. So my summary there is this group has the widest range of ages, neighborhood tenure, traffic calming, crime, litter, snow removal, leaf collection, and appearances matter the most. And it's specifically their properties that they're focused on. They're not focused on the larger neighborhood, they're focused on their immediate location, which is reading between the lines a little bit in those qualitative responses. But when I was reading through that was very much the feel I was getting. It was, it's me. I care about me. I care about how nice my property looks, how nice my street looks, less so about the community as a whole. They're the most likely to mention animal control, and Libby, you're going to laugh at this, rats. And they were also what I tentatively called the Starbucks contingent, because there were several people, and by several I mean about 30 or so people, that directly mentioned the Starbucks, and the majority of them were in this. A lot of them were saying, oh, they're just so rude. They get in my way, and yada, yada, yada. It's dangerous. On and on they went. There was one lady, the lady that actually wrote about rats, she wrote something like a 350-word comment, and I could only code her for rats. So it's pretty entertaining. But yeah, I mean, and again, the comments down below kind of give you a flavor of this group. Speeding delivery trucks, even school buses on Weisheimer, particularly those delivery vehicles at Robbie's Hobbies. I feel as though the Starbucks on the corner of Torrance is an incredibly hazardous situation. They're constantly yelling at each other because cars constantly block the east side of the intersection. Location does not look properly zoned for all that traffic. For instance, the Wendy's across the street is just as busy, but it doesn't interfere. So there are a lot of comments similar to that in this group, which to me says, peeling back kind of the negative Nancy aspect of it, they're really looking for some peace and quiet in the neighborhood, right? They're looking for there was somebody else that mentioned trains in this neighborhood and the horns specifically, other folks mentioning interstate noise. This group of folks is really kind of seeking the neighborhood to be a little more quiet, which I think is an interesting juxtaposition giving all the other groups to this point.
This is the people with contingency that I think of when I think of a community.
What kind of community?
Bedroom.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
They wouldn't want to live at my house.
So yeah, and like I said, the other thing too that I'll mention here is that this group was really interested in those street sweeping, leaf blowing, snow removal services more so than any other group too.
As long as they didn't make noise.
As long as they didn't make noise, right?
That kind of noise is okay, Jim.
Literally, one person was like, "I have a rental property that I'm renting, and I wish people would come over and do my yard work for me. My neighbors. I wish my neighbors would come over and do my yard work for me." Which I thought was really interesting.
I am surprised that 30 people all mentioned the Starbucks. BJ, didn't the conversation about Starbucks come up at one of the previous area commission meetings?
Often.
Drew, when doesn't it come up?
Yeah, there was actually one person who in the qualitative response said, "Thank you for sending a survey about the Starbucks." They literally thought the survey was about the Starbucks issue, as they called it.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, I'm not trying to make too much commentary on this, but that's what they were saying.
Clintonville is not friendly to mermaids.
Okay, so the last group, and this gets to your question here, Jim, is the Beautify Clintonville group. So this group is different than the previous group because they are much more focused on the neighborhood as a whole, which I think is interesting. So again, similar things popped at the top: improving that aesthetic experience, improving parks, repairing or leveling sidewalks, and improving alleys and service roads. But their list of qualitative priorities was the longest, right? So electrical improvements was their number one issue. Now, what does this mean? Visual clutter. There were a lot of people talking about overhead power lines, utility boxes, those types of things, and they kind of all naturally fell into this group. They were the ones to say, basically, yeah, the power lines along High Street are just ugly and obtrusive, and they really ruin the view. And it would really be nice to bury those underground. It would help with outages from storms, as you can see over in the quotable there. There's lots of people commenting about the need for green space or pocket parks in this group too. They really wanted to see the alleys picked up, not from it was funny. You could kind of read between the lines, like, not like a selfish, like, oh, the alleyways are my alleyway looks like garbage. It was more of like, all of our alleyways need a little bit of a facelift. So it was a bit of a different mood in the qualitative comments that you could even read. It was pretty interesting. They were really focused on neighborhood aesthetics, specifically that walkability aspect of neighborhood aesthetics. They really wanted a walkable community, which again kind of speaks to their desire to make the neighborhood in more general, more beautiful. Tree canopy as well was the thing that popped for this group, and not necessarily the other ones. Again, they wanted those restaurants and businesses to be developed, but this group was much more heavy on the restaurant side of the equation, not necessarily all businesses, which I thought was interesting. And then this group was also very interested in parking, but not in the way that you might think. They weren't upset that there wasn't enough parking. They were just upset about where the parking was located. So, which I thought was interesting. And then lastly, kind of that multi-use paths and Olentangy Trail piece. So just to read the summary there, high priority in the aesthetics of the neighborhood, from above ground power lines to flower boxes to street appearances. There were several people, one person I think in this group, maybe it was in a different group, but they were mentioning the street lamps and the appearances of the street lamps specifically. Alley litter, and like I said, they're distinct from that peace and quiet group because they're looking at the entire neighborhood, and they're less concerned with their immediate property or their street. And the quotables, as I mentioned, that electric overhead wires, and then better use of green space and architecture that is reflective of the neighborhood and making sure that all new buildings kind of look good. There were other people in here that were complaining about the lack of consistency of standard application when it came to zoning and development, types of things like that, where clearly it's not like, oh, I'm pissed that, they're letting people do things and the development's coming in. They're like, no, I want it to look nice more than anything else. Some historic preservation was here a little bit too. So, and like I said, that people could blend between these five, right? There could be somebody who's like a traditionalist but wants the neighborhood to be beautiful. There could be somebody that wants it denser and wants it to be beautiful. There could be somebody that is complaining about their immediate property and wants to be denser as well. And you could see how potentially three of these could be blended together, right? But I think what this approach does is kind of shine a light on the various types of attitudes that exist within the community. So that way, when, we are making these big picture infrastructure decisions and recommendations, that we're trying to not necessarily appease, say, the greatest majority, because I don't think that that's always the best way to go. It's how do we make sure that we're doing it in a way that makes sense, that can be rationalized, that, is defensible from a this is what our community and what it's headed towards is interested in. I would say that this group here, and the Peace and Quiet group and the Urbanist group are probably the ones that are moving into the neighborhood. I would say the Traditionalist group, by nature of being in the neighborhood a very long time, are probably unfortunately not going to be around much longer, not to be morbid, but, those are going to be some of your older residents, right? And they're going to be selling or, moving to retirement or doing a bunch of things. So I think that this survey is, I think there's some more digging to do, but I think this gives a pretty good representative flavor of the attitudes in the neighborhood right now.
Well done, Zach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can see me being in group 5, but who knows where I ended up. But yes, I can see all of that.
I know we're all trying to figure out which bucket we're in, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember my answers.
I know. Right. I'm a little bit urbanist. I'm a little beautify. What am I here?
Right. Well, So I did this several years ago in Wineland Park. And it caused a very similar ruckus in those public meetings. Everyone's like, well, who am I? And I'm like,
Sure.
The math says you're one, but we're humans and we know better than that. You can be multiple.
Exactly.
It doesn't what you think it does necessarily, but yeah, it's really good, I think, for decision makers, especially people in organizations like this, to have an unjaundiced view, perhaps, of public sentiment, especially when it comes to stuff like this.
I think if anything, this kind of tells us that I don't think I've jokingly said throughout the years that there are no two opinions that are exactly alike in Clintonville. And I think if anything, this doesn't put a person in a pigeonhole. I think that I see this data as being on a continuum and putting a person, in a shade of gray on that continuum. I don't see that anybody is a perfect, bucket space holder.
Yeah. I've always said if you ask 5 people a question about Clintonville, you're going to get 8 answers. So,
Pretty accurate.
But yeah, I did think, though, from an interesting perspective, that the sidewalks climbing to the top, is really, really interesting. And I think that's to me, that's a pretty clear clarion call, right? That, maybe if there were to be sidewalk audits that we wanted to propose in the neighborhood, that there would be a lot of people gung-ho to help with that, right? And to identify where issues may be. And, maybe using crowdsourcing and our own neighbors to help us understand where we should be making those investments. Because to me, that's not just, Sally McSue walking her baby, or Danny McDove running, to get over to the multi-use path. It's an ADA concern. It's an age and place concern. It's more than just these are the new people. It's also for, our older, longer term residents.
Mm-hmm. And that was very clear with the what was the name of the thing? Age Columbus.
Like Columbus.
Yes, that there were a lot of people when they did the walks with them. There were a lot of empty spots where seniors aging in place would have problems if they wanted to just walk someplace.
BJ, I really like the way you said that. Is that this represents a continuum. I mean, it's just like market segmentation, classically, but everyone fits somewhere, on one end of this or another. And I think, the next step, Zach, would be, to get the geography so we can start to see where some of the common complaints or priorities are located. What else do you see as a next piece that we do with this?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've done in this data set is I've hard coded these comments basically into the qualitative pieces, especially. And the infrastructure priorities box, there's actually a continuous variable. So for non-math people, that means what appears to be very precise numbers on those. And the neighborhood improvement priorities are dummy coded, or, either you said this or you didn't say this. So what's going to be really interesting is mapping out, the infrastructure priorities and actually creating a GIS raster. So that way we can see where those priorities are, right? But at the same time, too, comparing those maps with the ones and zeros bit is going to be, I think, really instructive because, one of the things that was obvious is we crafted that initial choice piece kind of in the dark. And I think now that we have these qualitative responses, you could almost redo it. And while I would love to redo it for you guys, unfortunately, I'm moving on from my job, so I won't have access to my software anymore. Certainly when it comes to a survey like this in the future, we might be able to figure something out and do some analysis that way. I got to figure out what to do, but Yeah, there's, I think, a lot of opportunity to deep dive even deeper. And not just that too, I think this committee would find a lot of use in actually reading through a lot of these comments and seeing for themselves what people are saying, because it's easy to be like, oh yeah, place a stop sign at Como, right? But placing a stop sign at Como just because one person says that, is that really a priority? We got to make sure that when we're looking at it from okay, there's like 7 people that say that as opposed to just one.
Yeah. So Zach, let's connect this week and just find a time to develop a methodology for doing the GIS work. I think I have someone I could put on that to do some of the data entry. It sounds like is necessary, and then figure out what's necessary, what the next step is in terms of connecting the data with a pinpoint of where the person was that answered the survey. Okay. I had one other item. I know we're at 8:05 here, and this is really more just to throw out there and see if anyone's interested. Some of you may know I'm on the Central Ohio Greenways board and on the marketing subcommittee. And one of the things that we talked about in a meeting this week was, especially in the sort of era of the pandemic here, starting to look to partners to put together sort of a walking or a biking loop in their neighborhood, and sort of using Central Ohio Greenways and other forums to sort of promote how you can get around your neighborhood, or how others might be able to, come visit Clintonville and go on a bike ride and visit, a number of destinations. So they were sort of looking for partners to maybe put together a bike route, that they might promote and say, you come ride the Olentangy Trail, you could get off and, get on the Greenways, the neighborhood bikeway and visit, this business or the farmer's market, or you name it, right? Park of Roses. So if anyone's willing to sort of brainstorm some ideas, maybe the next meeting we could sort of sketch out what a route could look like. And they're sort of looking for partners to start to develop those routes and what you might see along the way. If folks want to think about that, maybe we can chat more at the next meeting.
Yeah,
I sort
I'd be
of started
interested in looking into that.
Okay, great. I started to sketch something out. I thought we could use it ourselves, right? So it might be promoted, in citywide, but it's also something that we could promote. I was thinking initially of the map that Johnny Velo made, but it's no longer available, so we can make our own, DJ. Yeah, it's no longer out there. So anyway, great. I think that'd be kind of fun. I started to, while we were in that meeting this week, started to sort of sketch one out myself. And there's a couple places where there's gaps and we have to be maybe a little creative. But we've got art people can look at. We have businesses, obviously outdoor spaces, and the weather's about to be nice. So be kind of fun to do.
Okay. Right. Sounds like fun.
Cool. All right. Well, maybe we could do that sort of live next time if people want to think about what that might look like. And anything else for the good of the group?
I just want to give a shout out here to Zach. I don't know what we did to deserve you. I don't even know how you stumbled upon us. I'm just so gracious to you. I thank you.
Oh, of course.
Great job, Zach. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Where are you off to, Zach?
So I'm leaving Alliance Data, and I'm taking an opportunity with Pulte Homes.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to be managing their market research. So this is going to become my job again, which is fun.
Zach, you and I will become very close friends.
Sounds good.
Yeah, Zach, we really appreciate it. Just even the quick turnaround on taking a survey that was open not that long ago and coming up with these themes, and then the next step here of getting the geography in, it's just going to become more interesting as we continue to dig in. So it's going to tell us a lot and help set some priorities. So it's incredibly valuable.
Well, there is one thing that is outstanding that I think we should do here quickly. and that is select name.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. Libby, you mentioned it to me the other day, and it's completely slipped my mind. But now that we've closed it, we do need to do a random drawing of two names, right?
Yes.
Go through and pick a couple random ones and make sure that they're not on the committee.
Yes. Yeah, or related or whatever. Yeah.
Or involved in the farmer's market.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true too. We need to vet the name.
Oh no, that's getting it kind of.
Well, there's 780 responses.
Yeah.
Oh,
what
yeah.
are the chances?
We should be able to pick two, right? Are we picking two?
Yeah, it was one was Nosh and one was the farmer's market itself, correct, Jim?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Zach, I don't know how you want to do that, but I assume there's sort of a random generator.
I can create a random number generator in Excel and pick a couple random people that pop to the top. So
all right, sounds good. Yeah, why don't you do that and send it around, and we'll just make sure amongst our group here that there's no conflict of interest.
Yeah, and if you get them to me, I'll get it to Michelle White, and then we'll figure out how to get the people their prizes.
Yeah. And then we are on the hook here. So if we can get the data mapped out, over the next few weeks, I would love to be able to send out kind of a summary result of the survey to everybody that wanted it, because I think that people are going to be real excited to see that their voice was heard and that there are so many people that responded.
Yes.
Agreed. Yeah, and that was great because you did ask a question at the end. Do you want to see the results? And I don't know how many you got. How many were takers on that? But
everybody, there's only
great
20 people that said no.
Okay.
Awesome.
Sounds
awesome.
Nice.
Cool. Thank you for bringing those last two items up. Really important. Excellent. Well, thank you guys very much. Zach will be in touch this week. We'll find a time to get together and we'll go forward.
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Nice job. Thanks, everybody.
You.
Yeah,
All right.
good evening.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks.